This episode of the Paddock Pass podcast is brought to you by Renthal Street Hard Anodized Sprockets, up to 66% lighter than steel sprockets.
Mugello, are we back in love with it? Are the Italian fans finally learning to live without Valentino Rossi? On this week's Paddock Pass podcast, we'll be discussing our takeaways from round 6 of MotoGP and looking ahead to round 7 at a very different venue, the Sachsenring. My name is Adam Wheeler. I write for On Track Off Road online magazine concept thingy, and I'm joined by a morning alarm clock's very worst enemy, David Emmett, the spunk behind MotoMatters.com's excellent insight. And the man has yet to discover what an alarm clock actually is, the venerable Neil Morrison, a scribe for the masses. As ever, a big thanks to Renthal Street for helping us make the podcast possible. If you have a road bike and want to upgrade your experience handling or the longevity of key parts, then renthal.com is the place to go. On this episode, we're also grateful for the backing of Husqvarna motorcycles. The brand has the excellent Vitplin and the Svartplin, and of course the brilliant Norden 901. In 2023, Husqvarna Motorcycles is racing in both Moto3 and Moto2, thanks to their big alliance with the Licky Moly Intact GP team. And we've got a cool interview later in the show with Moto2 recruit Darryn Binder, whose brother is now the fastest ever rider in MotoGP. So keep listening for that as Darryn attempts his third different class from the last 3 seasons.
I would like to have a quick go at pronouncing Svartpilen and Vitpilen, because I think that might be the way you pronounce them.
Dave, that was my first take. I mean, could you not, give me a bit of a chance?
Completely random, but the first words I ever spoke were actually Swedish. So there you have it.
Why am I not surprised by this news? It's
Yeah, you're going to have to tell us more, Div.
When I was 6 weeks old, my parents moved to Sweden, and one day these two young Swedish girls came and asked if they could. They'd seen that my mum had a baby, and they came and asked if they could take me out in my pram for a walk. And they were wandering around, pointing at things the way that you do with babies, and they were saying "tita, tita," which is Swedish for "look, look." And then one day I pointed to something and said "tita," and my mum didn't know what I was talking about.
I'm biting my lip for so many lame jokes right now. It's unreal.
Depends what you were pointing at, Div.
It's even worse in Dutch. That's all I can say.
Listen, without further ado, then moments of the weekend. Back to you, Dave. Give us a tip-free moment of Mugello.
I actually have 2 moments of Mugello because of the contrast. That was on Thursday when we were, especially like Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, when we were leaving the track, when we were sort of walking around. The hillsides looked absolutely deserted. And I was really worried that we were going to have another 2022 where the track looked really, really empty. And then fast forward to Sunday afternoon, and the place was, to call it rammed is exaggerated. I think Franco Morbidelli said, I wouldn't say it was packed, but it was full. It was Mugello. It really felt like Mugello. There was an incredible atmosphere. The official numbers was nearly 78,000. Now that when I first saw that number, I thought, no, that's complete. The sort of fabrication, because they published it quite early. But then by the end of the afternoon, when they said 78,000, I thought, well, it's probably a slight exaggeration, but only a slight exaggeration. It was really, really, there was a real vibe, there was a real atmosphere, and it was great. It was just genuinely great to see, because Mugello that track deserves that kind of atmosphere.
It was busy, wasn't it? And it was also something of a resurrection. You kind of feel with that crowd number, that's something to build on. And there was a genuine love and display of admiration for Pecco Bagnaia, which, I don't think we've really seen quite so much at Mugello in recent years. So, the Italians are taking the whole fact that they have a world champion on a Ducati to heart. So that was cool.
Yeah, 100%. It was just really good to see.
My moment of the weekend actually involves Pecco Bagnaia and his rage in Q2, and qualifying in MotoGP over the last couple of years has really provided the kind of handbag moments of the World Championship. A lot of arm waving, a lot of gesticulation and kind of road rage, I guess you could call it. Marc Marquez is now a vintage tow master, and that's what happens when you're arguably the best motorcycle racer the world has seen, but you have a three-legged donkey on which to hone your craft. So I just thought it was quite amusing how Bagnaia was a rate that Marquez was kind of hanging around. And oddly, he wasn't hanging around for Pecco. He was waiting for Marco Bezzecchi, as he told us afterwards. But then he broke the lap record and made the quickest time, took pole position anyway. So, if you can do that with a Honda behind you, what are you worrying about, mate? That was my moment of the Grand Prix, among, quite a few to choose from. Neil?
I would have to look at the end of the Moto2 race. I mean, the Moto2 race wasn't vintage by any stretch. Pedro Acosta cleared off and won by over 6 seconds. I think his two challengers, or his two likeliest challengers, basically one messed up both of their races on the first lap. Sam Lowes and Alonso Lopez maybe had a chance to give Acosta something to think about, but then Lopez took Lowes out and then got a long lap penalty for that, which he then messed up and had to do again. So that kind of rolled both of them on. But the moment actually came in Parc Fermé afterwards, Acosta picked up like a Glovo style backpack, and we were sort of wondering what is going on. And then in Parc Fermé, he unzipped it and he had like 2 pizzas basically, and one of them I think he gave to his team to say like, look, whoa, I did it. And then the other one he just casually handed over to one of the Mark VDS mechanics that was basically holding Tony Arbolino's bike as if to go like, oh mate, do you want to have this? And the look of disdain from the Mark VDS mechanic, I think it was Guille Carrillo, was worth the kind of admission fee alone, basically. And you wonder I wonder how much of that was spontaneous and how much of it was Acosta trying to just wind Arbolino and his crew up ever so slightly, because he is quite a sharp guy, and he is very aware of the dark arts. And if he was doing it to try and give them a bit of a wind up, and I thought that was pretty fantastic. So yeah, that was my moment of the weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be great when Acosta gets into MotoGP, because he is going to spice things up a little bit. Just a quick thing about Alonso Lopez. It looked to me like they've actually narrowed the long lap penalty lane there, which is a really good way. Like we've had this in the past where it's been really difficult when people have had a long lap penalty is varied enormously. Like one place it'd be a second and a half, other place it'd be 3 seconds. And one way of really slowing people down is by narrowing the long lap penalty. So people really have to concentrate to make sure they don't go outside of it. And certainly worked it worked a little bit too well for Alonso Lopez, because he completely bollocks that up.
Neil, was that also your moment of the weekend because you'd had about 4 or 5 pizzas up until that point as well?
It was indeed, yeah, and it was a reminder to have another one on Sunday night just to kind of top the weekend off.
Right, okay. A reminder of the results then from Mugello. It wasn't the best race of the year, guys. I think it felt like the longest. Certainly, there was some action hot spots, but otherwise it was not a cracking duel for podium positions. For third place, you could argue the duel between Johan Zarco and Luca Marini was something. But we had 4 Ducatis in the top 4. It really was, a red fest at the track where they, in particular, Michele Pirro knows like the back of his hand. First non-Ducati home was, of course, I've lost him, Brad Binder in 5th place. Moving up from 10th on the grid. Aleix Espargaro, will come to him a little bit later in the show, in 6th. Just in front of Jack Miller, Marco Bezzecchi. A little bit surprising with the 8th. And Bezzecchi, when we spoke to him after the race, not looking too happy with that one. I think he expected better. Enea Bastianini on his return to MotoGP, 9th. Pretty good, you have to be said, because of his his physical condition coming into the Grand Prix. Franco Morbidelli, we're going to move on to him right now because, it was a good performance. Finished ahead of his former world champion teammate, of course, Fabio Quartararo. Maverick Vinales. Maverick, what are you doing? I'm going to banish you forever from my fantasy team, I think. Taka Nakagami in 13th, the lone hero for Honda on another tough weekend. Fabio Di Giannantonio not able to, replicate his feats from 2022 at Mugello. And Augusto Fernandez grabbed the last point ahead of Pirro in 15th place. Dave, let's go straight to Franco Morbidelli, actually, in Yamaha, because it was one of the talking points, but importantly, it was one of the last ones, because Franco is normally one of the last riders we speak to anyway. His media debriefs are quite late. But he seemed to have had some news over the weekend in Mugello, because he wasn't too optimistic, or let's say complimentary, about extending his future with Yamaha in the Premier class.
No, it was also it was very interesting that on Thursday, Friday, maybe even Saturday, Franco was quite he was sort of like down. He was a bit down. He was clutching for straws, it felt like. And then after the race on Sunday, he was almost sort of positive, despite the fact that he's only finished 10th. He did finish in front of his teammate, which is really, really important. But speaking to Jack Appleyard on the MotorGP.com feed, Jack asked him, a perfectly bog standard question. So, do you think this result improves your chances of staying with Yamaha for next year and or of getting another year with Yamaha? And Morbidelli basically said, who says I want another year with Yamaha? So Jack says, do you want another year with Yamaha? And yes, rather cryptically, Franco Morbidelli replies, ask Lynn Jarvis, Yamaha boss. Now, that I think it was a bit of a giveaway. There is something going on. We've been wondering about the future of Franco Morbidelli for a little while. Where does he go? Does he stay? Do Yamaha keep him? Who do they replace him with? It does sound like Morbidelli might be off to somewhere else, and that somewhere else is likely to be the VR46 team, because we know that Valentino Rossi has been trying very hard to keep Morbidelli in MotoGP. Of course, there's only 2 seats in the MotoGP in the VR46 team, and Luca Marini deservedly has one of them. Marco Bezzecco even more deservedly has the other. But, Bezzecchi is going to want more factory support. So the logical thing to do would be to move him up to the Pramac squad and kick Johann Zarco out, because, Zarco's been a fantastic rider, but he's at his ceiling. This is the best that Johann Zarco is going to do. But it really
he's still chasing that elusive win, Dave.
Yeah, but that's the point. Like he should have had a win. Marco Bezzecchi has already won races. He deserves. You would have to say, if you have to choose between Bezzecchi and Zarco, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. As good as Zarco is, Zarco's been fantastic. It's also been interesting looking at Zarco's bike throughout the first part of this year. Last year, I would go down into the pits and there'd always be something new on Zarco's bike. They'd be playing around, because Zarco is basically playing the sort of like the racing test rider role. And he's not been doing that this year. Now, maybe Ducati don't have so much to test, but also maybe it's a different role.
Could there also be another reason why Franco was slightly happier on Sunday, Dave, and that was after your mutual bonding earlier on in the debriefs? Before you tell that story, though, Neil, let's say, Franco Morbidelli, he rode brilliantly on a 2-year-old Yamaha, got himself up to 3rd in the World Championship, and beg your pardon, former Moto2 world champion as well. But it's safe to say that the 10-year Yamaha is looking like it looked like both parties should go their separate ways for both, you would say. Who would we say could step into those shoes then at Yamaha?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. From the start of the year, Yamaha seemed to have lots of options, didn't they? It seemed that they had the likes of Jorge Martin on their radar. Maybe even Marco Bezzecchi was on their radar. Alonso Lopez was spoken about as a potential recruit that they could get to step up. I think Jorge Martin was basically saying, I want the factory seat, but I want it in 2025, which indicated to me that he's going to stay put in Pramac next year. As Dave mentioned, there is talk that, Ducati really want to keep a hold of Bezzecchi, but to do so, they'd probably need to offer him a brand, an up-to-date bike, which would mean he could go up to Pramac. And then, Morbidelli could perhaps slot into the VR46 team. That sort of leaves Yamaha a little bit thin on options. They could look at Moto2, obviously. You can't think of any other riders in MotoGP that jump from the page that, they would have to sign. Maybe 2 years ago, Raul Fernandez would have been one of those names, but I don't think he looks quite as attractive now. Do you go for Pedro Acosta? It's not sure whether KTM can offer him a spot for 2024. It's obviously a bit of a sort of left field choice, but we know that Dorna is so keen for a Brit in MotoGP. Could Jake Dixon be on the radar? Has he done enough in Moto2 to deserve a seat in a factory Yamaha team? I'm not sure he has, but, the idea of a Brit moving up to MotoGP seems like it makes sense from a kind of a publicity point of view, and keeping one of the TV companies that pays you a very high sum every year on side and happy. So yeah, it's really tough to say. Yamaha don't seem to have, compared to the start of the year where you thought, well, maybe it could be Toprak or Martin or Bezzecchi. Now you're looking at it and thinking, well, it's none of those guys probably. So where do they go from there?
Yeah, I was chatting to Nikki Kovac earlier today, and she'd spoken to Albert Valera, who is Jorge Martin's manager, and he confirmed that basically Martin has a 2-year contract with Ducati with an option for himself on his side to leave after a year if he's offered a factory ride, a ride in a factory team. But Ducati then also have an option that, say, Yamaha offer him a seat in the factory team, then Ducati can offer him a seat in the factory team, and then he would be forced to stay with Ducati. But I mean, no, I'm saying forced. I'm sure it would be absolutely terrible for Jorge Martin to be in the factory Ducati team. But I think there does seem to be. I mean, like Yamaha do seem to be struggling to find someone to put on the bike, and there is getting more and more pressure, I think, to have a British rider, especially with BT Sport are being taken over, or they're being sort of merged into Discovery, into this new company TNT. They seem to be making a focus, putting more effort into their MotoGP coverage. So it would put more and more pressure onto it. Fabio is Jake is very, very good friends with Fabio Quartararo. That would make sense as well. It'd be a good team. Whether as you say, Neil, has he done enough to deserve it? I don't know, but it would certainly be a perfectly good stopgap measure. I can't see Pedro Acosta wanting to take a Yamaha, and this is the problem which both Yamaha and Honda have, is like who actually wants to ride their bikes, because we saw that Alex Rins managed to break his tib fib during practice, or was it the sprint race? The sprint race, I think, wasn't it? And Joan Mir, no, it was during the race. Joan Mir broke his, he injured his right hand during the sprint race in a crash. Marquez crashed out of the race. It's just not a particularly appealing prospect.
I'd have to say, I mean, in answer to your question, Neil, no, Jake Dixon so far hasn't done anything to warrant that ride. I mean, if he does get it, it will be a political move, as we all know. It will be a passport thing, which ironically is what a lot of British riders were complaining about in the past. But then I think, we're talking short term. I mean, you don't want to be, as you say, Dave, on an RCV or an M1 for 2024 or maybe even 25. But, I think if you're going to invest in a rider like Tony Arbolino or Pedro Acosta, then Yamaha will give that sort of rider, that sort of talent, a 3-year, a scope of a couple of years, like they did with Jorge Lorenzo. I mean, they signed him very early on when he was still racing 250cc GPs. I mean, he was a project they're willing to invest in. I think they could say to Acosta, come up to MotoGP next year. Don't worry about any kind of results. Fabio's going to do the heavy lifting for us. He's our championship bet. We're going to be working in the background. We're going to be, improving the M1. By the time that you've learned and come up to speed in this Premier class, then, we're going to have something that will suit you. Oh, and by the way, here's a contract of a couple of million, just to keep you sweet. So I think, there is some kind of mid to long term options there for Yamaha. That could be the best route.
But if you're Pedro Acosta, do you trust Yamaha? I mean, there would be a time when a bad season for Yamaha was a bad season and they would be able to come back from that the following season. But both the Japanese factories find themselves in such a rut currently and so far away from Ducati and even from, you would say, KTM and to a lesser extent Aprilia, that I think as a Moto2 rider, yes, maybe they're able to pay you a serious amount of wage, but I mean, if your goal is to be fighting at the front of MotoGP, then I really don't know that you go down that avenue.
The other thing is like the comparison with Jorge Lorenzo. When Lorenzo signed for Yamaha, that Yamaha was a pretty good bike. It was extremely successful. It had Valentino Rossi on it, who was winning a lot on it. Colin Edwards was doing well on the bike. There was just no question that it wasn't a competitive machine, and this M1 is quite clearly not competitive.
Well, I mean, but Acosta's not going anywhere. I mean, he may have a rush to get to MotoGP, but if he's still going to be under 20 years old when he's making his first start in the Premier class, or under 21, then, that's still a long old career, the better part of a decade at the top. And also, if the machine isn't quite up to spec, I don't think he has anything really to lose, because he could still make results, he can still learn without having a motorcycle where you think, right, okay, maybe the case where Enea Bastianini is in at the moment, where he has a championship winning motorcycle and a championship winning team. I mean, this guy is under pressure because that's arguably the seat everybody wants, because Bagnaia, as we know, is very much the golden child.
Yeah, and just about Yamaha there, I mean, Bagnaia's race time on Sunday was pretty quick. He was, I think, 2 seconds quicker than last year's race time. However, he was half a second slower than Fabio's race winning time from 2021. And Fabio was, on Sunday, nearly 18 seconds off Bagnaia. So he was 18 seconds slower than he was 2 years ago at Mugello, which shows that things are not going well this year.
And yeah, sure. What has Acosta got to lose signing for a factory team? Well, for a start, a whole bunch of bonuses. If you jump onto a competitive machine and you do well straight away, there's a chance that you're going to earn a lot of money in bonuses from your sponsors and from other people, and that sort of thing. You're also making yourself a very attractive prospect for the future, for the next couple of years in terms of sponsorship. But if you sort of drift around in the mid pack on a Yamaha for 2 or 3 years, then your helmet sponsor, your leather sponsor, all the other personal sponsors are not going to be paying you quite so much, because they'll be pouring money into the people at the front.
Yeah, and there's always a Spanish rider coming through. Like in 2 crap years in MotoGP for Acosta, suddenly Sergio Garcia, who might in 2 years be the guy that everyone in MotoGP is trying to sign, or Danny Holgado, who's having a fantastic year in Moto3. Maybe he's the guy
Jose
that everyone...
Rueda.
Yeah, or Jose Rueda, or Ethan Guevara if he gets his act together. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like he is going to be the golden child no matter what. It's like there's a lot to choose from if you're Spanish.
Ethan Guevara is not going to get his act together.
Yeah, but the thing is, Pedro Acosta, arguably could win 2 world titles in 3 years. I still think he's a bit of a generational talent, even though it looks like, as usual, Spain are inundated with, many options when it comes to riders. I think Acosta must be right at the top, Dave. I mean, you're saying that this kind of statement by Morbidelli is kicking off silly season. I still think Acosta is pretty much the fattest bird in the paddock that people are, chasing around at the moment.
Let me just refer you to the sponsor of this podcast, Husqvarna, and KTM could quite easily put 2 more bikes on the grid with a lovely Husqvarna sticker on it. It'd be a factory bike. It'd be factory backed, be factory spec. Acosta would get all of the factory kit. Basically that would be a perfect place for him to land. The bike is really good. We've seen that the bike is good. It would be competitive. He would be, he'd have the factory cachet. He'd have the factory salary. I think, and Dorna would be back up to 24 bikes. That makes sense to me. But I haven't spoken to Mr. Pira recently, so I have no idea whether, how full his pockets are at the moment.
Dave, we need the Pira Mobility Group accounting department to pay us for this podcast first before they start laying out many more millions for a MotoGP product. So don't shout too loudly. Neil, your talking point from Mugello was, as we said, 4 Ducatis in the top 4. It was just like a red steamroller, wasn't it? But also, Pecco Bagnaia, what a fantastic weekend. Picture perfect. Arguably better than he looked in Portimao at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, exactly. It was picture perfect. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be this easy, I don't think, for Pecco. He had he had a small fracture in his right ankle. He showed up to Mugello with a crutch, wasn't walking freely at all. But then when he got on the bike, he said everything felt better than it did when he was just walking. You just had to look at his results. He was fastest on Friday, pole position. won the sprint comfortably, only by 0.3 of a second, but it definitely seemed like a bigger gap. He just was managing that really well. And then on Sunday as well, it just, you look at the gaps and, okay, less than 2 seconds covered the podium. But I mean, for me, there was rarely any sense of jeopardy in that contest. You know, Becco, I think from the third or fourth corner, you just knew that he was going to win. And Ducati were so far ahead of the rest. I mean, you mentioned that there was 4 guys in the top 5. Had Alex Marquez not crashed, thought it would have been 5. Ducati's at the top. Had Marco Bezzecchi not had some weird, mysterious issue with the front end of his bike, there's no doubt.
Tires, tire.
Right, yeah. There's no doubt he would have been up there as well, you know, so it could have been a total Ducati whitewash in the top 6. Ended up just them in the top 4. And, it was interesting to hear some of the other guys on other bikes talking about what they observed when they were following the Ducatis and just how easy it seemed for them, you know, at Mugello. Alessio Spargaro was pretty good on it. He said, if you watch Pecco's pole position lap, there's not any moment where it seems that the bike is moving around, where he's out of shape, where it looks like he's having to be super aggressive. The bike stability was just absolutely fantastic, and obviously the engine is a massive benefit. It wasn't the fastest bike in a straight line over the weekend, but just the engine is so strong coming out of the corners on the straight as well. It was a pretty unbeatable package. And you know, this year we've had KTM in the mix, we've had Aprilia in the mix, in Kota we had Honda in the mix, but we haven't really seen Ducati sort of stamp their authority on a race weekend quite like this so far this year.
2 points. I was quite surprised by Luca Marini. I mean, on Thursday he was telling us, you know, the repercussions of the Le Mans crash. I mean, both of his thumbs had been hyperextended. I mean, that's kind of an injury you don't really tend to think about that much, because when a rider crashes a motorcycle, they let go of it. But I mean, Marini was really caught under that bars there from the impact and was struggling. And so I thought, you know, coming close to sort of taking that podium finish, full props to him. And secondly, was there a part of when we were watching this race, because Neil, you mentioned how stable and strong Bagnaia's been looking, but he was also looking very formidable at Cotta and then dropped it inexplicably. I had a lot of people wondering why, you know, what are the causes behind this? Was there a fear that he could do the same, or do we think that, you know, Bagnaia's maybe jumped over this sort of mental or set up obstacle that, you know, caused some concerning errors in the first part of the season?
I mean, I thought that Pecco just looked really, really confident. He looked really calm. You know, didn't seem at all concerned all weekend. So no, I don't think there was ever a moment. I mean, it was, the other thing is, like, he was being kept sharp by Jorge Martin, so he was having to concentrate because Jorge Martin kept on sort of like inching back to get the gap to about half a second, and then Bagnaia would just find that little bit extra. He'd pull out another 1 or 2 tenths, take it up to 7, 8 tenths. So it was. And it wasn't really until right at the end that he actually pulled away. So I think it looked to me like Bagnaia was focusing and concentrating on just managing the gap and controlling the race. And that's a really good way to make sure to keep your focus, to maintain your attention, to stop yourself from making mistakes.
I think Ducati also showed that they're still very much the strongest motorcycle on the Grand Prix grid, you know, despite the progress of Aprilia and also KTM. But like we said, Bagnaia, you know, making an apt demonstration that he is the reigning world champion and going from strength to strength. So it was a little worrying on one side.
Yeah, I mean, also, I thought you asked him a really good question about, you know, you asked Luca Marini a really good question, you know, where are you making the difference? And Marini explained it, or where is Bagnaia making the difference? And Marini explained it really well, that Bagnaia is able to hang off the bike, especially around left corners, in a particular way, which allows him to lift the bike up a little bit more and get onto a fatter part of the tyre, while putting the center of gravity of the entire package, bike and rider, in such a position that you know, he can still carry the same sort of corner speed. So basically, he can carry, you know, a bit more corner speed and accelerate earlier, because he's hanging off of because of the way he's hanging off the bike. And Marini said he couldn't do that because he's too tall and gangly, and especially in the chicanes, when he tries to ride like Bagnaia, then it just takes him physically too long to climb up on top of the bike and then over the bike over to the other side to get the thing to change direction. Whereas Bagnaia, being sort of shorter, allows him to actually sort of, move around quickly.
Yeah, and I remember in 2019 when Petrucci won the race there, I think it was Dovizioso was saying it was the final turn where he was making all the difference as well. So it seems that is the key part of the track at Mugello, because obviously you can carry, if you can nail that final turn, you can set yourself up for the long straight and down into San Donato. Ducati, I think, have only lost one race at Mugello since 2017, which was Quartararo's win in 2021. So, this is their track. But yeah, I was still surprised just by the kind of extent of their dominance. I was expecting coming into the weekend that there could be a few things that could maybe go wrong, or maybe one or two of the other manufacturers. I thought Aprilia, for example, were going to be really strong, but that just never quite materialized.
Guys, my kind of headline from the weekend was KTM's new top speed record. I think we saw it. It was possible on Saturday. I think in P1, Binder cracked 360 along the main straight. Of course, the weather changed a little bit on, later in the afternoon and throughout Saturday. But yeah, it was evident early on that, the 1.1 kilometer straight there at Mugello, where the two previous records set by Jorge Martin and Brad Binder. I actually asked both of those riders about this in the press conference. And you have to love how matter-of-fact MotoGP riders are about speed. I mean, it's an incredible amount. I think 366.1 is something like 227 miles an hour. I mean, that is not slow. And, it's also perilous, as Alex Marquez pointed out to us in the race. His faux pas when he almost took out his brother, and I can't remember who was alongside him now, but, he explained that his braking, his marker, everything was the same as he had done every lap, but because he'd been sucked into sort of the vortex created by the trails and the aerodynamics of the motorcycles, that's the reason why he almost took out riders and ran straight on at turn one. So, they're hitting some serious speed there. As we said in the note show, along the main straight, across the rise and into San Donato, it's one of the unforgettable places to watch MotoGP on an annual basis from any track on the calendar. And, Binder was talking to us on Saturday. He believed that 370 is soon going to be possible. He said he actually had a few Ks in the pocket. I can't remember if it was Binder or actually Jack Miller who said they were not actually hitting the limiter. I think it was Binder on Sunday, actually, when there was a slight headwind and the guys didn't reach the same kind of speed levels. But he said that, he wasn't hitting the limiter on the bike. So there's scary potential there. I mean, Dave, for you, is 370 too much? I mean, especially around a track like Mugello, which, we were talking about some of the reservations or limitations of this place in our preview show.
Yeah, I mean, like 370 is. Is it too much? The problem is not the top speed. The problem is the stopping. The problem is the runoff. You're hitting 370 through there, and then you've got to get the bike stopped back down to, I think, about 90 k's an hour to get through San Donato. This is one of the big problem that MotoGP has, is that we are running out of room. If you think about, I think in the 500 era, they were just starting to crack 300 kilometers an hour through at Mugello. And if you think of like the difference, 66 kilometers an hour, which is 40 miles an hour, I think, if I remember correctly. If I could do my into those appalling imperial units correctly, it's basically it's 20%. It's over 20% faster. We've seen a top speed increase in over 20% faster, and we've got heavier bikes going faster. Sure, they're more powerful. The brakes are much more powerful, but you're having to. That shortens the braking. That sort of effectively shortens the braking distance, because you're having to scrub off so much speed in such a short distance. So and if something goes wrong, then the bike travels for a very, very long time. the safety issues around circuits is always in runoff areas. There are other things which you can fix, which you can deal with, but not having enough runoff is going to be an issue. And if we keep going faster, then we're going to run out of traction. And there's no point in asking the engineers at the factories about this because their job, they think, is to go faster, whereas in reality, the secret to racing is to go faster than everyone else. Like the old joke about how do you avoid being eaten by a bear? You run faster than the person that you're with. You have to go faster than your competitors rather than just being outright faster. But these bikes keep on going faster and faster and faster, and at some point we are going to be doing a 22 race season at Qatar because that's the only place with sufficient runoff.
That's a little bit my approach to swimming in the sea, Dave. If there's somebody out further than you, they'll be the first one eaten by the shark.
Exactly. Just
make sure you're between somebody else on the beach and you'll be all right. But, the speed of Mugello is an annual subject, isn't it? It is creeping up every year. I know technicians are worried about it, but it's something that people don't really want to kick off about too much. It's just like an accepted thing. It's the same reason why the riders might be aghast at having to do a sprint, but then there's not a great deal of complaints about it. There's a certain degree of acceptance or tolerance. So I just wonder how far it's going to go. I think there was a tension across the Grand Prix this weekend, particularly in Moto 3, as we know, when you have up to 10 bikes all going into sort of, turn one. I think Moto 3 reached fantastic speeds. Moto 2 got up to more than 300 kilometers, an hour as well. It's something to marvel at, but also be, I think, extremely concerned about moving forwards. But anyway, let's crack on because we've got lots on the show today. Our winners from the weekend. Neil, you first.
My winner from the weekend is the guy that finished in third. We haven't really spoken too much about him, Johan Zarco, who had a really good race. He had a really good weekend actually. Was up there in the mix in the sprint on Saturday. Has had another solid start to the season. Was on the podium in Argentina, on the podium in France, of course, at his home race, and just missed out in the sprint podium here at Mugello, but then fought through on the Sunday. I think he was down as low as 10th on the first lap, and there was a nice summary of his race by Dennis Noyes, friend of the show, of course. Shout out to Dennis if he's listening. Where I think he was saying from lap 5 onwards, he was basically, if you took away the first 5 laps, he was the fastest guy in the race and was actually making up time on Bagnaia. Now, Pecco was obviously just, I think, controlling the lead at the front. You got the impression that he had certainly something more to give, but Zarco was excellent, and another lap or two, and maybe he could have got his teammate Jorge Martin. The only thing that I would say, the only caveat, is that this is very typical Zarco behaviour. He's going to be great at the Sachsenring, I'm pretty sure. He was on the podium there last year. Maybe he'll be in the hunt for the podium again this year. He'll probably get a decent top 5, top 6 at Assen, and then we're going to have to really assess his performance from the second part of the year, because the last couple of years he's been great in the first half and then just gone to pot. So I thought he had a great weekend, but this is very much in the kind of Johan Zarco manner and way of doing things. I think the proof of the pudding, whether this is a kind of new rider, will come later on in the season.
Yeah, he's going to get a podium at Mugello, podium at Sachsenring, podium at Assen, and then get sacked during the summer because they have to make way for Marco Bezzecchi. Fantastic rider. It's just that he's reached his ceiling.
The ruthlessness of it, Dave. It's you're unforgiving.
It's not me, mate. It's not me. I'm not paying their salaries. It's just the way it is. It's about it. In the end, it comes down to winning next year.
My winner from the weekend was Aleix Espargaro, a rider who I think always confuses us because he's so transparent, he's so dramatic, he's so articulate. He can sort of riff on a number of subjects across sort of 4 days at a MotoGP weekend, and it really does sort of send your head into a warp. Espargaro was mentioning things like, whether he'll actually be racing next year. Then he was a little coy on, a mystery bicycle accident, which affected him badly on Friday. He had to have blood drained from his heel. after essentially crashing while doing a lap of pedal power around Mugello while looking at his phone. He said it was incredibly dumb. He said he apologised to the Aprilia team 100 times. It looked at one point like he wasn't going to race. P1, on Friday was a real scene. I mean, he was in tears. Crashed, had to be helped off the bike, but then got it all together, had some treatment, and finished 6th in the race. So I think you could look at it and say over exaggeration, but I think Alesta showed again that he's actually pretty a hard guy. He can talk a good game, but he can actually make a decent game. So he's my winner. Yours, Dave?
My winner of the weekend is the winner of the weekend, which is Pecco Bagnaia, because he literally won everything. He set pole. He set pole out of sheer spite for Marc Marquez. Became the first person to lap in under 1:45. He won the sprint race. He won the main race. He led every single lap of both races. It was just an astonishingly settled, controlled, managed weekend. It was it was quietly dominant. It was very much a Pecco Bagnaia sort of a weekend, like not showy, not going off and winning by 10 seconds, just getting the job done, but being completely invincible along the way. So it was very, very impressive, especially sort of still hobbling a little bit with his heel, as Wilco Zeelenberg told us on the RNF Unlocked show this weekend, that injuries to your lower body are far less of a worry than injuries to your upper body. But still, it was discomfort. He couldn't brake properly. There was all sorts of issues, and he still sort of carried this off. So yeah, to me, this was Bagnaia's weekend.
And of course, wherever there's a Manchester City, there's also a Liverpool Football Club. So on to our losers of the weekend. Sorry, Neil, I added that just to see your little smile. For me first, my loser was anybody who had ridden a Suzuki last year. Bitterly disappointing for the LCR team with Alexis Rin's double leg break. I mean, that's looking like, of course, maybe not a season-ending injury because we've still got so far to go, but it's incredibly tough for the Catalan, and it looks like getting back for Silverstone after the summer break will be a real mission. And Joan Mir is not going to be riding in Germany, as we found out after his injury to his right hand. But then, Dave, would he really want to come back and ride the Honda anyway, even if he was somewhere near, kind of full fitness?
He's contractually obliged to for the next year and a half. He'll take any time off he can.
You're full of positivity for the riders on this show today, aren't you? Sorry, Neil.
Yeah, and per Rins, I mean, it was all looking so positive for him on Friday. He was inside the top 3, I think, at the end of P2. He was standing on his foot pegs, Kevin Schwantz style, and beating his chest as he came in to the pit lane after that late lap that he did to secure a place automatically in Q2. And Marquez on Friday was saying, I think this is one of 5 or 6 tracks that we have during the year where it really suits Alex Rins' riding style. He's always gone fast here, and you genuinely thought that maybe a decent result could be on for him, but sadly it unravelled, and yeah, he's now looking at a pretty long recovery period. So just hope that he's doing okay, and that we'll see him back again. Maybe Silverstone could be too early. Maybe start of September might be more realistic. I'm not sure.
It's a shame because I think Silverstone was another one of those tracks where Rins is really, really good. And it's also a shame because Alex Rins has been really good. He's been of the two Suzuki riders who've made the step to Honda. He's just been really good. He's probably been the best rider to adapt to that bike in a long time, since Cal Crutchlow, really, because he hasn't complained. He knows what he's got. He knows the bike is difficult. He's just got on with it and tried to make the best of it. And I'm genuinely impressed by Rins on the LCR Honda.
Dave, keep talking. Who was your bottom feeder from Mugello?
My bottom feeder from Mugello was the 2021 MotoGP World Champion Fabio Quartararo. Firstly, because he got beaten by his teammate. He put that down to the wrong tyre choice, going with the medium instead of the soft. He just didn't have the feeling with the medium. It was just a miserable week, and he just looked not even despondent, just resigned. He knew that this was all there was to it. The bike is too they've got more power in the Yamaha M1, but that Yamaha has come at a cost of the Yamaha's strong point, which is rideability, like drivability, having a smooth power delivery. As soon as they open the throttle, the bike starts wanting to move around, and that's making it very, very difficult to control. And it's very un-Yamaha-like, really. So this to me, that has got to be a concern for Quartararo, and we've got Sachsenring coming up where he's been pretty decent in recent years. We've got Assen, which is obviously a very strong Yamaha track and a very strong track for Quartararo. So it's things are not looking good.
Yeah, if it doesn't go well in these next 2 weeks, then I think we're going to have to write off the season completely. And also, this was a weekend where we heard that he was breaking up with his longtime personal manager, Eric Mahy, who he's been with since 2016, I think. So, again, I guess in situations like this, you're probably left looking at, well, how am I in this situation? And maybe fingers start getting pointed at why the situation is just like this. But yeah, certainly Mahy's departure from Quartararo's corner indicates that things are just as bad behind the scenes as are not going on well behind the scenes, just like they are on track.
Who did you select as your abject performer, Neil?
Well, it sounds harsh because this guy actually had a great weekend, finished second in Moto3, but Dennis Onju was my loser just because he was the absolute pick of the Moto3 riders all weekend. He scored pole position by half a second. He was so fast in the third sector of the track through the Arrabbiata 1 and 2 corners. He had such an advantage there, and you could see he made some fantastic moves on his competitors during the race. I thought he had done pretty much everything he could to win the race. He passed Danny Holgado with a great move at Arrabbiata 2 on the last lap. He pulled out 5-6 bike lengths in the corners after that to lead onto the main straight. And still Dennis managed not to win the race by 500ths of a second. And you get the impression, or I certainly have the impression now, that he might be one of those guys that's just doomed not to win a race in Moto3 just because, he's not got the frame, as in like his personal frame. He's just a bit too big. He loses time. On acceleration, he loses time, top speed. And, even at places where he can make the difference through the corners, he's still got quite a sizable handicap. So I just really felt sorry for Dennis, to be honest, at the end of that.
Dennis Onchu, the Johan Zarco of Moto3.
Oh, God. Poor Dennis. Perish the thought. Listen, guys, we're coming to a section of the show that I usually love and, makes me want to gloat and feel all superior. But Fantasy Roundup for, people who joined us in the league, they're now almost 500 of you, so full props. We must get our asses into gear and get some prizes sorted for 2023. We have a winner from last year even who still hasn't got a gift pack. So we're working on it. Trust me, we'll try and confirm what we can give you as a prize for being far more knowledgeable than us. It was the worst weekend ever for me, guys, and Mugello. I picked the Marquez brothers. I mean, they both went straight into the gravel. I had Maverick Vinales as a gold rider and Brad Binder as well. So thank God Brad managed to save some paltry points for me. I think I lost something ridiculous, like 13,000 places in the general MotoGP league. I mean, that is some relegation. I support Queen's Park Rangers Football Club, and, I don't think even they plummeted down the table as quick as I did. So, I think I had a look earlier on, and I'm 229th in our own Paddock Pass Podcast 2023 league. So, is there any other comments? I mean, I'm ready to eat some humble pie. I'll be chided by both of you.
Never trust Maverick Vinales for a fantasy team. Never.
Exactly. I mean, I have Maverick Vinales, but then I also had Alex Rins, which seemed like a really good choice on Friday, but it was just deeply unfortunate on Saturday. I'm very sorry if me selecting him had anything to do with his misfortune, because that was very cruel indeed. But don't worry, you're still about 100 places ahead of me, Ad.
And about 150 behind me. I've gone from outside 200, the top 200, to 65th in 2 races. So have some of that.
Blimey, goodness. What are we doing, Dave? Anyway, listen, we're going to suspend our fantasy for a moment and go for a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Sachsenring right after our chat with Darryn Binder, who's in a slightly unique position for 2023.
He is, yeah. He's the only rider in Moto2 this year to step down into the class from the MotoGP. So he is a rookie, but yes, he's kind of had a slightly different route to the rest of the riders. And he's been pretty unlucky so far this year. He was really coming into his own just before he broke 2 bones in his hand at Austin. He just finished in the top 6 in his first wet weather ride on the Moto2 bike in Argentina. That was seriously impressive. And he was kind of giving the indication that he was already a sort of top 6, top 8 guy in the class. But then that injury has obviously derailed his season somewhat. He was unlucky again on Sunday, taken out at the first corner by, I think it was Jeremy Alcoba. It was Fermin Aldeguer. Darryn has not really had luck on his side recently, but you do feel that once he gets his sort of physical level back, he will be a bit of a force in Moto2, I think, in the second half of the year.
Renthal street, chain, and sprockets are perfectly matched for maximum power transfer and efficiency. From racetrack to daily rider, with over 800 fitments, Renthal Street has a final drive solution for almost any bike. Use renthal.com to find the correct fitment.
Darryn, great to talk to you. Great that you're back in the paddock. Give us an update on the injury. How's the hand?
Yeah, the hand's good. It's coming up to 8 weeks now since the accident in America. I got it fixed immediately on the Tuesday after the race in Austin, and I was adamant I was coming back already for Jerez. I flew out there and I thought it was all good, and when I got to the medical check, the guy told me to squeeze his hand, and I squeezed it, and they looked at me like I was crazy, and I felt like I was squeezing it super tight, and it turned out I just had zero power in my hand, and it took longer to come back than what I expected, and unfortunately I made the call to skip Le Mans because I still felt that I wasn't going to be competitive, and luckily we had that 3-week break afterwards, so it gave me some more time to get it working properly again, and I feel like I'm back to where I should be and ready to get out there tomorrow.
So Jerez was the best time to play you at golf then? That would have been an easy match.
100%. I think I would have lost a few clubs.
Darryn, I mean, there's obvious questions to ask you. How are you finding the whole culture shift this year? I mean, MotoGP was a real baptism of fire. I mean, you were incredibly positive all the way through last year. I mean, there was some fantastic ups and there was some downs and some tough learning experiences. But even just the day-to-day work, I mean, media commitments, sponsor commitments, how are you finding that sort of adjustment being in Moto2?
Yeah, I find it's a lot more chilled in Moto2, both on track and off track. Obviously for me it was a major step from Moto3 to MotoGP, and I feel like coming down to Moto2, it's I wouldn't say it's in the middle. I feel like it's just below the middle. It's definitely more relaxed, and to be honest, obviously what comes with the sport and that in MotoGP, and it's all part of it. But it's definitely a little bit more enjoyable in Moto2. It's a little bit more relaxed, more my style. But it's been super cool. The Moto2 bike, I've really been enjoying it. I mean, I felt like I picked up quite quickly on it, and maybe that's obviously the year of experience in MotoGP, but I felt like I adapted to the Moto2 fairly quickly. And, it was really nice to be competitive again. Last year was a struggle, some ups and a lot of downs, but it felt really nice to be back and be a bit more competitive. And I know that there's a lot more in the tank, like I'm still finding my feet in Moto2, and it's really cool to know that I've got everything I need to be up in the front for sure.
The Licky Moly Intact team, you'd said had been chasing you for a while, for a couple of years. They finally got you for this year. Talk about the differences again from a satellite MotoGP team to what seems like a very well-organized, well-supported structure in Moto2.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful to be here. Honestly, I feel like I fit in with this team so well. It's more like a close-knit family, to be honest. And I really been enjoying my time with these guys so far. And when I was at home for the last 2 races, I was really missing them. And the welcoming back I got yesterday, it really makes my heart so warm. And I really feel like a part of this team, and that we all want the same end result. So, yeah, it's really amazing. And I mean, coming from a satellite team to a really, how would you say it, top Moto2 team, I feel like the transition's pretty much the same, really good team, and I'm super happy to be here.
Because that's interesting, isn't it? Because the good teams seem to have a role. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a purpose. There's a high level of organization. I mean, that's the sort of image that comes across here anyway.
Definitely. I mean, everybody's doing their part, and you've just got to get on with your job, and everything else is taken care of, which is really amazing. And it just helps so much to be able to rock up and do your part.
Is there much to be said for the nationalities involved in the team? I mean, coming into very much a Germanic kind of structure compared to, last year you were surrounded by a real mix of personalities and characters. Is there much difference there?
To be honest, I think throughout my time in the paddock here, I've been amongst all the nationalities and it's cool because I feel like obviously all the Germans here, I feel like they set in their ways, they're straightforward, and it's really nice because I feel like everybody here feels like a family more than just a job, and I really enjoy it. And I mean, in the box I've got Italian, Spanish, Belgium working with me, so we've got quite the variety going on here, and it seems to be working well so far.
I mean, I know you've been missing race time, and that's been a bit of a shame. I mean, but you're back on track now. When you were first trying the bike and testing it in pre-season, was there a part of you that thought, I kind of would like, this is part of my education, I maybe missed this a little bit by jumping Moto3, MotoGP? Was there a part of you that was relishing having a new kind of set of parameters for the technical side?
Yeah, definitely. The first time I rode the bike, I could definitely see things that I thought, flip, maybe this would have been helpful to have ridden this bike before going to MotoGP. But at the same time, I feel like I learned a lot riding that MotoGP bike that helps me on the Moto2 already. So, it's a tricky thing. But when I look back at it now, there's no ways that I would have changed what I did. I mean, it was an amazing experience for me to go to MotoGP for a year. And I'm just very grateful that I got the opportunity to go back to Moto2 with such a good team and now have a go in Moto2. So, it's been good. And I really want to get my Moto2 program where I feel it can be and be fighting up for the podium and that, because I feel like I've got everything I need and I just need to put it all together now.
I mean, you come across as quite a level-headed guy anyway, but do you think that experience of MotoGP made you appreciate even more how the sport can be hard, maybe in ways you don't always expect, because you went from being front runner in Moto3 right into, like we said, the deep end, and now people I think rightfully look at you and say, look at Darryn Binder and think, right, there's a guy we expect to be again challenging for GP wins.
Yeah, it's one of those things you just got to, like last year was definitely tough, and it definitely made me appreciate when things are going well, and you've really got to enjoy those moments when things are going right, and make sure you never give up when they're not, because there's always another opportunity around the corner, and as long as you keep your head down and keep going, it always seems to turn around at some point. And I mean, it's so nice to come back and be able to enjoy racing a little bit more. At the end of last year, I feel like it got me down a bit at the end, and I'm stoked to finally feel like I'm finding my feet again.
Do you think there's much to figure out about Moto2? I mean, Moto3, of course, has its own particular way you have to race, and then MotoGP as well. But do you think you have a taste or a flavour enough of this category yet to think, right, that's what I need to do?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was, I got used to riding a bike with traction control, and coming back, I had to obviously get used to riding without it again, because this bike has a lot of torque, and that first touch of the throttle is super aggressive, and when you don't have that safety of traction control, at the beginning I was very, very slow on the throttle, and slowly, step by step, I started to figure out what I needed to go fast, and I feel like I'm starting to understand exactly what I need, and I feel like it works well for me. I feel like I ride a bike in a good way for a Moto2 style, should I say, and I don't see why I can't be competitive,
I'm bouncing from, maybe it's a silly question, but bouncing from Dunlop to Michelin back to Dunlop, is that something that maybe people don't think about or realise that it's actually a little bit trickier to get, used to?
Yeah, obviously everybody speaks about the MotoGP tyres and how amazing they are, and they are so great. And a lot of the time you hear guys saying, oh, Moto2 tyres are really, really difficult to understand and that. But I found that I've picked it up fairly quickly. I felt quite confident with the Dunlop straight away coming back, and I don't know if it's maybe because I didn't spend that much time on the Michelins, or if it was maybe because I spent so much time in Moto3 on the Dunlops, but I found that the Moto2 tires didn't feel that bad to me at first. So I mean, it's definitely different, but I feel like I've found my way pretty quickly.
Are you the kind of guy that likes to study, his opposition quite a lot? I mean, are you looking at the likes of Acosta, Vietti, trying to work out what they're doing differently, or do you just focus on your own gig?
I try and focus on my own gig, but if I do get the opportunity out on track to ride behind them or something, I feel like then I take it in fairly quickly. And if I get a chance to ride behind somebody, I really feel like I can pick up fairly easily on what they're doing different. And normally I'm able to, once I've made that step, if I've seen something, I'm able to normally keep it there quite okay. So I try and watch back all the races and all the free practices and stuff, and try and see the lines and things like that, and you obviously look out for those front guys and see what they're doing. But at the same time, it's one thing to see it and be told it even, but it's another thing to do it yourself. Sometimes you just got to go out there and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, because when success comes in Moto2, I think something that you maybe need to be looked at for is your adaptation, because I don't think there's any other rider who's had quite the scale of challenge in the last 2 years that you've had.
Yeah, it's definitely been a strange road to take, but I'm enjoying it, and it's been good, and I'd never change it for anything.
Listen, I don't want to bore you, and I know you're asked a lot, but you live with your brother, you're good friends with your brother. What's your view on Brad? I mean, we just did a show recently on the podcast where we said, could this be the year? Can we actually count Brad as a real championship contender in 2023? I mean, is there anything different you see in him day to day this year compared to the last couple?
Honestly, I don't see any difference in him. No difference at all. I mean, I'm definitely biased.
Surprised.
I mean, I'm gunning for my brother through and through no matter what. And I've always believed that if he gets things right, having the bike dialed in how he wants it and having a bike that's really competitive, I have zero doubts that he can be fighting for a world championship. I mean, I look up to my brother. I think he's one of the best riders in the world. And it's so good to see him this year. Finally things are working out, and it's really cool. And I mean, the whole project is really, this year is looking amazing. So hats off to them. And I hope that come the end of the year, he's in amongst the fight for the championship. That'll be something special for sure.
Speaking of the Binder family, you're a little bit closer to, a family dynamic when it comes to the brands and the relationships you're inside, kind of like the Pura Mobility Group, Husqvarna Motorcycles, of course. Again, that must also, is that consolidation feeling there? Is that, a little bit kind of, you guys have closer things to talk about?
Yeah, it's so nice to be in amongst the same group, because we end up doing similar things. We've got the same training bikes, and it's nice to be under the same roof, should I say. And it's definitely cool. I mean, we've both gone our own ways, and we'll both continue to do our own things at the end of the day. But I mean,
you have a nice shiny Monster Energy cap as well.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely are different. There's no doubt about that. But to be in amongst the same kind of things is really, really special.
Lastly, Darryn, discuss. Your bike is probably the best looking one in Moto2. I mean, it stands out a mile.
Yeah, 100%. I think we have the best bike on the grid. Not only looks-wise, I think we have the best equipment as well, and a super good team behind it. But I really, really like the look of the bike. The Lumo wheels, I think they definitely make it a hard life for the tire guy. He spends most of his time cleaning those beautiful shiny wheels, but from outside the bike looks amazing.
Well, listen, mate, we've been interrupted a little bit by a military jet flying here over Mugello, but thanks ever so much for your time. Best of luck, of course, and we look forward to seeing you on the box soon in Moto2.
Oh, thank you so much, and I hope that happens fairly soon.
Thanks again to Husqvarna Motorcycles for helping us with that. So, guys, we're now on to the Marquez Ring. 10 left-handers, anti-clockwise, 3.7 kilometers compared to Mugello's 5.2. The biggest amount of race laps of the season. Mark wasn't there in 2022, and we're talking about a full year since Fabio Quartararo took victory there. Was possibly his last moment of full happiness, perhaps, with the M1. Pecco Bagnaia was on pole, and he has the lap record, so we know the Ducati and the Italian are going to be formidable and, fully in contention around this particular circuit as well. Dave, quite importantly, Mark's level of competitiveness this weekend will say a lot for Honda's current state, with the RCV, where they are, potentially where they're going. I mean, he's won there, 8 times, and the bike wasn't the best on all of those 8 occasions, so he has been able to ride around problems at this particular venue.
Yeah, I mean, Mark owns the Sachsenring. It's as simple as that. He just doesn't get beaten there because it is all lots and lots of long left corners, which is his speciality. What was interesting at Mugello was that Marquez was saying the Kalex chassis, because he started the weekend on both with two Kalex chassis. The Kalex chassis struggles a bit in long corners, which is a problem at Mugello because it's all long corners. They'd found this at Le Mans as well. They'll go to the Sachsenring, and if it's as long as it's dry on Friday, which it looks like it will be, you would expect them to do a back-to-back with the old chassis, because although the Kalex chassis, I think it sort of stops and turns and is better on corner entry, there isn't much of that at the Sachsenring. So it might be worth going back to the HRC chassis, the chassis that he was using at the start of the season, to try and see how that works in Germany and regain some of his form. And to be honest, I have already put Marc Marquez into my fantasy team because he it's hard to see anyone beating him. It's not about. It is a circuit where you can ride around the weaknesses of a bike as long as your bike turns. I think the Yamahas are going to really struggle because they're struggling with turning this year. So yeah, it's hard to see anyone beating him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if someone like Alex Rins was fit, maybe he would be in the mix somewhere. If Fabio didn't have Yamaha issues, I think he would be in the mix, but he's obviously not anywhere near the front at the moment. I think if Ducati can get podiums at the Sachsenring, then that's brilliant, because this used to be such a bad track for them. We're really one of the worst tracks on the calendar. This and Assen, I think, were two of the most difficult back when, Dovizioso was the factory guy there fighting Marquez for championships. Also, I was expecting Mark to go in two-footed on Honda after the race in Mugello, because obviously we saw his reaction in the gravel, where he was basically just holding his arms outwards, like, what is going on here? What do I have to do to get a decent finish here? There was some real frustration on show immediately after crash, but obviously he had a few hours to cool off by the time we spoke to him on Sunday, and he was saying, actually, I was a lot closer than I thought I'd be here this weekend. Yes, we've got issues, but we weren't as far away at Mugello, which has been a historically difficult track for Honda and me, than we thought. So from that, I was taking that Mark was thinking, actually, good tracks coming up for us now, and Mugello's always been tough. Let's get the head on. So yeah, I go along with that. With what Dave said, it's really hard to see anyone beating them.
It is worth remembering what Luca Marini said about Pecco Bagnaia, about how he is exceptionally good in long left-hand corners. So maybe Pecco can give him a bit of a run for his money.
Who's your prediction then, Neil? I mean, if Dave is putting all his money on Marc Marquez, who do you fancy?
Pecco probably, I guess. Yeah, I mean, Jorge Martin's in great form. He has mixed memories from this track, though. But yeah, you would have to say one of the Ducati boys.
I'm considering his third place in 2022 and the fact that he starts so well. And I love the little wave to Pecco along the front straight, you can see from Pecco's rear-facing saddle cam. And the fact that the KTM is getting closer and closer to what he actually wants. And I'm going for, I think it might be a Jack Miller day in Germany. I wouldn't put it past the Australian getting a decent result. And then, of course, Brad Binder can never really rule him out. I mean, Maverick Vinales has also been particularly good at Sachsenring, but I'm not allowed to mention that name anymore, am I?
No.
I actually think that the Aprilias might be a good shout there, because they can carry the corner speed.
Yeah, and you think Aleix qualified in the front row in 21 and was leading the race for the first part. So yeah, it's a decent shot. And also Binder, if you think back to 21, it was a KTM that pushed Mark hardest when he last won at the Sachsenring. Miguel Oliveira had one of his best rides, I think, in MotoGP on that particular day. And Binder, on his first visit to the Sachsenring on a MotoGP bike, finished fourth or something, and he came from way back. So KTM's might not be a bad shot either, actually.
Two critical Sachsenring questions for you both. Dave, are you riding your motorcycle to this Grand Prix as per usual? And will you remember to take off the front wheel brake lock in the paddock, or will we have to come and help you pick up the GS at some point in the evening?
I'm sure I'll find. I mean, I now have a little one of those memory thingies hanging off of the front of my disc lock, so I will remember to take it off. But I am completely sure that I'll find a different way to fall off of my motorbike. And as for, am I travelling there by motorbike? You know, as does the Pope defecate in the woods?
Neil, importantly, is it Bratwurst Frankfurt or a 4-litre Krug of beer?
It's probably a bowl of pho, because we're staying in Chemnitz, and last year we found a pretty banging Vietnamese restaurant in the city centre, which I think surpassed all the German sustenance that we had encountered up until then. So I'm definitely down for hitting there on Thursday night.
You will be avoiding the German sausage.
Yes.
Just to round up our little kind of preview of Sachsenring then, let's just go through one particular memory we have each from that race. And for me, it was maybe going there for the first time. And my memory's so poor. I can't remember which year it was, but walking down through, you know, turn 11, going down into the waterfall, and that kind of double left coming back up the hill, you can get incredibly close to MotoGP bikes there. It's a fantastic spot to watch from again. I think I even took a picture of like Valentino Rossi with my mobile phone, took it back to the press room, and, you know, was amazed at how, you know, how well it looked, because you're that close. You know, you can really, they're not going particularly fast. It's a bit of a hot spot for crashes as well down there at the bottom of the hill. But yeah, it was you know, one of those moments where you think, right, okay, I'm going for a walk around the track. You know, it's a fantastically weird venue, Sachsenring. I mean, you have fast spaces, you have very compact and unusual spots where the track almost like touches itself on the way back. It's quite strange, but yeah, getting up close, I think that's my kind of main memory. Dave?
Yeah, speaking of getting up close, yeah, I mean, like I remember when Jorge Lorenzo got onto the Ducati and went down to the final corner, and standing in there trying to watch him use the thumb brake. You know, you are literally close enough to do that. My favourite memory is slightly cruel, as you might expect from me. It was before they paved the massive field where they put the car park. There'd been the weather at the Sachsenring is always very, very weird. It can be really hot, it can be very humid, it can absolutely chuck it down with rain. I think there'd been an absolute downpour I can't remember if it was the Saturday or the Sunday. There'd been an absolute downpour. The field where everyone was parking their cars was absolutely sodden. I was there on my motorbike, so I sort of walked away and rode away feeling very smug about myself, and then came in the next day and heard about all of the horror tales of people having to find tractors to tow people out of the car park because they were so mired in mud. It's a very sort of Sachsenring sort of thing to happen. Since then, you know, they've put a lot of gravel down. It's much easier. No one gets stuck there anymore. So it's just one of those things, because very amusing.
Evil man, Dave. You're an evil man.
I am.
My favourite memory from the Sachsenring wasn't actually when I was there, but just a great race from the past. I remember, I think it was Rossi and Gibernau were fighting in 2003, and they were together the whole race, and it was clear that Rossi probably had the speed to win and win quite comfortably, but instead was trying to make a bit of a race off it and was letting Sete lead, and then was kind of following him and then going back to the front and making a nice show for it. And it seemed as though he had timed his victory march to perfection, but then he bollocksed up the braking for the final turn, ran wide, and Sete just got the run out to the line. And I think I remember hearing that even Jerry Burgess, who was Rossi's crew chief at the time, was like, I don't think that was the cleverest strategy that he did there. Yeah, but that was sort of Rossi seemed untouchable at that time, and the fact that someone was actually able to pip him to the post and make him look a bit stupid, that was quite a remarkable thing.
Neil, I'm going to need to pick your memory because it is such a short track. You get sort of these weird. You can sometimes have very close. Quite close results. And wasn't there like a dead heat at Sachsenring one year, and they had to separate the two riders by it was either 125s or 250s, so it was going back quite a long time.
Yes.
They ended up having to separate the two riders by going back to see who'd set the fastest lap.
Yeah, was it 2000? Was it the Moto 3 race or maybe it was the 125 race?
I think it was two strokes, and it was definitely like 2008, 2009, 2010, maybe that sort of that sort of period. It was a long time ago. Yeah, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but yeah, it is. It's that kind of a track. I mean, there've been just some fantastic. I think it was 2006 that we saw an absolutely banging race with 5 people crossing the line, where within
4.
4 people crossing the line within sort of a second or whatever. I think, was it Rossi beat Lorenzo by 0.99 seconds? Or
it was Melandri that day.
Yeah. It was, but it was just a really. We have seen some fine racing there.
What about the year? It might have been the first flag to flag where we had like 10 riders at the exit of pit lane. That was
it was more than 10. It was something like it was 12 or 15. So it was so bad that they had to change the rules the next time, because it was just an absolute sprint, and it looked like like nobody thought that we were all going to be able to come out of there in one piece. They ended up being sort of you will be leaving pit lane in order. That was when Stefan Bradl led at first, because Stefan Bradl sort of got his front forks fixed. It was wet. The track was wet, but it was obviously drying, and he got his front forks sorted and a dry setup for his front forks. But they were trying to change the shock, and they didn't have time. So they had to put his wet shock, which was much softer, and got away, led the race, and then was just the track dried out, and he ended up getting gobbled up.
2011 was the dead heat in 125s, and it was, we were speaking about Dennis Andre earlier, Johan Zarco that lost out on that particular occasion to Hector Fabel. So yeah, that's good. That's a good shot, Div.
Thank you. My memory isn't as fading as badly as I thought it was.
Well, that's it this week. Don't forget to check our Patreon channel for loads of content, especially the Paddock Notes shows that we record every afternoon of every day of a Grand Prix. We share our thoughts, opinions, riders' words, and some audio we managed to grab from other figures around the pit boxes. There's a free trial period open at the moment, so sign up, enjoy it, let us know what you think. Also, send us any questions or comments through Twitter at the usual place, Paddock Pass Pod, or through Patreon. And don't forget that the show can also be seen now on YouTube. We'll be back with our first notes recording on Thursday from the Fatherland.